The World War II-era Germanic obsession with unique, overly complicated, and maintenance-heavy vehicles has been well documented by historians and engineers alike. However, rarely is attention given to the various attempts Germany made to move away from this notorious stereotype and towards more standardized and resource-efficient methods of production. As such, the highlight of today's video is the Entwicklungsfahrzeug 25, a paper tank that at best existed only as an experimental chassis and never reached production. The E-25 was part of the E-series of armored fighting vehicles proposed by Oberbaurat H.E. Kniepkamp, civilian head of automotive design at Waffenprüf 6. This was the office responsible for the development and testing of new tanks and motorized equipment for the Wehrmacht. Before World War II, Germany had been a pioneer in the field of armored warfare and entered the conflict fielding a large number of tank designs that were by and large superior to their opposition. But by constantly introducing new variants and upgrading existing ones to stay ahead of the technology curve, the German war industry quickly became overburdened. This was a particular issue for self-propelled anti-tank vehicles, which constantly needed to be upgunned and up-armored to deal with heavier Allied armor, particularly on the Eastern Front. As a result, tank destroyer units often fielded multiple converted vehicles with different maintenance requirements, creating an absolute logistical nightmare. In 1942, Oberbaurat Kniepkamp stepped forward to propose a radical and sweeping solution to the problem in the form of the E-series, all of which were supposed to share parts and design principles in order to simplify both assembly and field maintenance. The few surviving pieces of documentation related to this plan shed light on some of the vehicles that could have rolled out of German factories had the war not ended at least a year before any of them had passed the early prototype stage. Given the lack of primary sources regarding the E-series, most design details are subject to considerable interpretation. This video will try to stick to known facts as much as possible, but viewers should be advised that speculation is inevitable. What is known for certain is that the E-25 was meant to be a casemate tank destroyer with a rear-mounted transmission, designed with an emphasis on speed, concealment, and ease of maintenance. The vehicle made heavy use of sloped armor on all sides, with most plates angled between 55 and 52 degrees. Had it progressed beyond the prototype stage, the E-25 would most likely have been 5.6 meters long, 3.4 meters wide, and a little over 2 meters tall, and weighed about 27 tons. There would have been 4 crew members protected by armor plates between 50 and 20 millimeters thick. The power plant would have been the Maybach HL101 engine, producing 550 horsepower at 3,800 RPM. A large part of the interest of the E-25 stems from the fact that its design documents indicate a concerted effort by German engineers to address the known problems with existing vehicles. Chief amongst these problems was a front-heavy suspension, which particularly plagued the long-barreled versions of the Panzer IV and its tank destroyer counterpart, the Panzer 470. To address this, the E-25 was supposed to have a rear-mounted drive unit, coupled with an external suspension system for each of the 5 road wheels. The initial design specifications for the E-25 included a Maybach V12 HL110 400 horsepower engine, but this was slated for an upgrade to add an additional 150 horsepower, giving the design an expected but never proven top speed of 57 kilometers an hour, with a 210 kilometer range on a full tank. All of these internals would have been mounted inside a boxy, angled superstructure of welded armored plates with a bolted roof that could be easily removed for maintenance. Drawings of the E-25 do not show any vision ports, but at least one for the driver would have been mandatory, as would a periscope or other sighting device for the commander. No details about the vehicle's topside have been recovered, but it's likely these would have been similar to or even direct copies of contemporary designs like the Jagdpanzer 38T. In comparison to the very heavily armored Panzer 470, the E-25 featured overall limited protection, with its upper front plate being only 50 mm thick, sloped at a 50-degree angle. By 1945, most Allied anti-tank guns would have been more than a match for this level of protection, leaving the E-25 relying mostly on its low profile and small size for survival. Despite this, the E-25 would have been able to match the Panzer 470 in terms of firepower, as it would have likely mounted the same 7.5 cm L-70 gun. The L-70 was an ideal weapon for a tank destroyer, being powerful and accurate enough to threaten most enemy tanks up to 500 meters with standard armor-piercing rounds, which could penetrate 124 mm of rolled homogeneous sloped at 30 degrees. Tungsten solid shot rounds could tunnel through up to 174 mm of armor at the same slope, but these were rarely issued and often unreliable. Evidence on how the L-70 gun would be mounted is unclear, but the gun cradle was likely attached onto the frontal glacis plate just like on the Panzer 470 and Jagdpanzer 38T. This arrangement presented several engineering challenges, resulting in the need for the gun placement to be offset slightly to the right of the vehicle. To compensate for this imbalance, ammunition loadout and most crew positions were located on the left of the gun mount. It should be noted here that while the L-70 would have been the most logical choice for the E-25, it was never actually confirmed as the final choice for the production model. Proposed alternatives included the 8.8cm L-71 or even a 10.5cm howitzer. Author W.S. Carson mentions in his book Light Tanks of Germany in World War II that a prototype 10cm PA 1000 smoothbore gun was also intended to be mounted in the E-25. Only one of these guns was ever made and tested on a modified Pak-38 carriage. Perhaps the most ambitious proposal was the installation of an autoloader alongside the L-70 gun, which would have granted a rate of fire of up to 40 rounds per minute. Though unbelievably destructive in concept, the reality is that a combination of excessive recoil and limited ammunition would have rendered the result as an impractical novelty. And the E-25 needed to be as small and light as possible, so nothing larger than the L-70 was going to work. Like many other tank destroyers, the E-25 would have come equipped with secondary weapons to at least give it a hope of defending against enemy infantry. No specifications for this weaponry exists, but some internet sources have gone as far as depicting the E-25 as having a top-mounted cupola sporting a 2cm cannon. This is almost certainly fiction, making about as much ergonomic sense as mounting a rocket launcher to a motorbike by the handlebars. Much more likely options include a standard Ruhmdumpfire machine gun mount that could be operated from safely within the vehicle, or a Nahverteidigungswaffe grenade thrower. The crew layout of the E-25 is another unknown quantity, though it would have likely looked similar to its contemporaries, with 3 of the 4-man crew on the left side and the commander on the right. This arrangement was less than ideal, all but ensuring multiple casualties in the event of a frontal penetration, even by lower caliber solid-shot ammunition. But as fate would have it, the E-25 never got its armor tested by Allied anti-tank guns. Had the war in the East turned out better during 1942, it is possible the E-Series could have been more than a collection of interesting technical drawings, but this was not the case. If fully implemented, the E-Series might have introduced the kind of standardization Germany needed for an extended conflict, but it would have needed to at least have several months of downtime in order to retool existing production lines to new specifications. Given that Allied bombers had very little interest in leaving German industry intact enough to make such a radical conversion, the E-Series languished in obscurity. However, one order for a few experimental prototypes was given, and one of these may have been partially completed before the war's end. Evidence for their existence comes from the interrogation of the project's head, Oberbaurat Kniepkamp, during his interrogation by the Allies after the war. Kniepkamp claimed that at least 3 E-25 hulls were built at the Alket plant in Berlin-Spandau, but these were never found by the Allies. Kniepkamp may have been simply lying or exaggerating the scale of his E-Series project for the sake of clout. Meanwhile, W.S. Carson's book claims that the Argus plant may have assembled a few incomplete E-25 hulls by January 1945. Fellow author Duško Nešić goes up one step further in his Armament of the Second World War series, where he claims that 5 prototypes were completed and in testing at Katowice during the same period. Given the complete lack of substantiation for any of these claims, who one chooses to believe ultimately depends on personal preference. The most likely scenario is that the production run on E-25 prototypes was officially started at some point in late 1944, but either got cancelled or simply abandoned shortly afterwards because of material shortages. If they did exist, they were probably quickly destroyed or ignored, as no photographic or physical evidence has materialized. The dismissive attitude the E-25 project received during its lifetime is understandable given its paper specifications. With its cramped interior and lackluster armor, the vehicle would have only been really useful in an ambush role and stood little chance of positively impacting the balance of power between the Axis and the Allies. While another vehicle with even more inferior characteristics, the Jagdpanzer 38, did make it into production, it had the advantage of using parts already in production and already available assembly lines. While the E-25 would have likely needed complete retooling to be built. There was simply neither the time nor the resources to do this in the middle of a war. To make matters worse, its main advantage, that of being able to easily exchange parts with other similar vehicles, would have only come into play if the rest of the Kniepkamp E-Series had been constructed alongside of it, like the E-10, with which it would have shared some components. Before we end the vehicle, we have to mention why the E-25 is popular in the modern era. World of Tanks features the E-25 as a very rare premium vehicle, and it has gained a reputation for being extremely overpowered at its tier. Like many paper tanks given life within the game, the E-25 model takes many creative liberties, featuring a raised cupola mounting a 2cm cannon, a top speed of up to 65 km per hour, and a smaller chassis than its paper specifications indicate. This model has been popular with modders, making appearances in mods for other games such as the Forgotten Hope mod for Battlefield 1942. And with that, we conclude our look at one of Germany's many failed attempts to reorganize its armored corps throughout World War II. But what did you think of the lonely E-25? Do you think it would have made a better tank destroyer than, say, the Panzer 470? Was there any real merit to the E-series? What other vehicles from this project would you like us to cover? Make sure to comment your opinions below. And don't forget to check out the Tank Encyclopedia website for a more in-depth look at the E-25 and similar failed concepts from the German army.